in this video we're going to be talking about solving absolute value equations, and basically we're always going to follow those same simple 4 rules that I gave you. We'll have simplify each side of the equation, use the distributive property as needed. All right, the next one, get variables to one side of the equation. Then we get the variable alone by using SADMEP, and then we lastly always remember to keep our equation balanced. Okay, now this is just some basic rules. Like I said, it's something that I've always helped keeps me organized. And like I also told you before, these are not the only things that you need to know, but these are the good way of getting started. So what happens if we've done all of this and all of a sudden we come up with this, the absolute value of x equals 4? What do we do? Well, think back to 7th grade and ask yourself, what number gives you an absolute value of 4? Well, there's actually 2 possible answers. You could actually have the absolute value of -4, okay, because that would give you 4. And then you would have the absolute value of +4. And we know that that equals 4 because both -4 and 4 are 4 units away from 0. So how does this, knowing this information back from 7th grade, help me with this? Well, it simply means that I can actually split this equation up into 2 pieces. So it means that I can split it up into x is equal to 4, or I can split it up to x is equal to -4. So what's happened here is when we get an absolute value equation, we actually are going to end up having 2 equations where we have one having the positive side, x is equal to 4, and the other one equals x equals -4. And we know that these are our answers because if we plug 4 in the place of x, we would get the absolute value of 4 equals 4, and that checks out. All right, and then if we plug -4, this answer, back into x, we get this answer. So this means we have a side rule. So when we're working with absolute values, we have a side rule, and we're just going to simply say split the equation into 2. And that's just we'll just call it like that. This is not really an official rule. This is, again, a Mr. Lewis rule, but this is a good way to kind of remember it. So when you see an absolute value equation, we're going to split it into 2 different equations. So let's go ahead and do some problems and show you what I mean. So this first one's pretty easy. It's pretty much like we did a while ago. There we go. That was in the way. All right. So I'm going to split it in 2 equations. I'm going to split it into x is equal to 3, okay? And then I'm going to split it also into x is equal to -3. All right, those are my 2 equations, and actually I've answered it. How do we know? We plug our work back in here. So it says graph the solution as possible, and I'll show you that in a second. But first off, I want to prove to you that this is true. If we plug 3 back into this, we have absolute value of 3 is equal to 3. Is this true? Yes, it is. It is true. All right, let's plug -3 into this equation. Absolute value of -3 is equal to 3. Is this true? Yes, it is. So both of these answers are correct. All right, so this problem has 2 answers. Now it says graph the solutions if possible. Well, that's pretty easy. We can just draw it out real quick. Okay, I'm going to go 0, then we'll go 1, 2, 3. So that would be here. All right, and then I would go the other way, -1, -2, -3. Graph that, and that would be here. So I've graphed it very quickly. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is good enough. All right, so now let's look at the next one. Got a little bit different. It's got a little bit extra to it. So x is equal to -4 equals 1. Well, what do? Just like we did over here, we split it into 2 different equations. I'm going to split it up into x minus 4 equals a +1, and then I'm going to split it up into x minus 4 equals a -1. That's all I do. I just split it into 2 different equations, and now I solve. I'm going to follow my SADMAP again, and to get rid of this subtraction, I'm going to add 4 to both sides, and I get that x is equal to 5. And then I do the same thing over here. I'm going to add 4 to both sides on this one, and this time I get x is equal to 3, positive 3. So here's the issue. Do both of these answers work? Well, let's find out. We need to put these back into the equation. We're going to do a check. So I'm going to put the absolute value of 5 minus 4 is equal to 1. Well, 5 minus 4 is equal to 1. So the absolute value of 1 is equal to 1. Does that check? Yes, it does. All right, let's plug this one back into our original equation. The absolute value of 3 minus 4 is equal to 1. Well, 3 minus 4 is equal to negative 1. So the absolute value of negative 1 is equal to 1. Does this work? Yes, it does. So what are my answers? Both of these. Okay? So I can plot this, graph it if necessary, and we will. Excuse me. So I'll just draw a little quick number line. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to put a 0 in the middle. And my answers were 5 and 3. And I'm just going to kind of put it over here. I don't have to, I'm not going to make this perfect today. But I just want you, because you know how to use a number line. It doesn't have to be perfect today. You just plot it. All right, and that's okay, because sometimes really in math, when we're just kind of plotting it, it doesn't have to be perfect for our purposes. But if we wanted to do this on a real scale, we would actually draw this out nicely and then plot at points. But for this is absolutely fine with me, because you understand that there are 2 answers to this on a number line. All right, so I'm actually going to get you to do the video on your own now. Excuse me, these next problems on your own. Problems 3, problems 4, problems 5, and problem 6. Be aware, 6 is going to be a little bit of a doozy, and I'll show you when we get to it. All right, so I'll see you in just a moment. So for number 3, you should have broke it up into 2 different equations, which were the exact same equation. X is equal to 0, because the only number that has an absolute value of 0 is x. So that was easy. All right, number 5, move this over a little bit. Break it up into 2 equations. 3x minus 2 equals 10, and the other equation would have been 3x minus 2 equals a negative 10. So when we go to solve this out, you would have gotten x equals 4, and the other one would have been x is equal to a negative 8 over 3, or negative 8/3. Well, your job at that point in time is to make sure that you double check it by plugging x back into the original equation. And I did so. 3 times 4 gives me 12. Subtract 2 gives me 10, and the absolute value of 10 is 10, so that checks out. And then when I work out the other one, I find out that the absolute value of negative 10 is equal to 10, and that checks out. So this is correct. All right, so now let's look at number 6. I'm going to do this one a little bit differently than that. So this is probably what you did. You broke it out, and you had 2 different equations, and you had 5x minus 2 equals negative 10. Well, when you go to solve it, you had x is equal to negative 8/5, and then you did the other equation, 5x minus 2 equals a positive 10, and when you solved it out, you got x is equal to 12/5. And if you did this, you did this correct. However, did you check your answer? All right, so there's been one thing I've been doing this video I haven't really stressed, and for purpose, but what I'm stressing here is to make sure that you check your answer. So what we need to do is to plug this negative 8/5 back into the original equation. So let's do that. So I'm going to say 5 times a negative 8/5 minus 2, and I want the absolute value of this, okay, to be equal to a negative 10, because that was what my original equation said. So now that I've done that, let's work this out. 5 times a negative 8/5 actually gives me negative 8. And I could work this out on paper, but I'm not right now. This is going to give me a minus 2, and I'm looking for the absolute value is equal to negative 10. Well, negative 8 minus 2 gives me negative 10. Here is my question. Does the absolute value of negative 10 equal negative 10? Well, let's find out. What's the absolute value of negative 10? Well, that's a positive 10. Does positive 10 equal negative 10? No, it does not. That means that this cannot be my answer. This doesn't work. 10 does not equal negative 10. So no, it does not work. All right. So now let's try this one. So we're going to plug the same in for this 12/5 into my original equation. The absolute value of 5 times 12/5 minus 2 is equal to negative 10. Well, 5 times 12/5 is 12 minus 2 equals negative 10. And that's the absolute value. Well, 12 minus 2 is 10, and I'm looking for the absolute value. What's the absolute value of 10? Well, it's a positive 10. Does 10 equal negative 10? No, it does not. So x to the 12/5 cannot be my answer. So what is my answer, Mr. Lewis? Here's a simple thing. No solution. This has no solution. Now, why is that? Why does this thing have no solution? Well, look at the question before we do anything. We just proved that this thing has no solution. We just worked it out. We had some answers, but when we actually tried it in, it doesn't work. So, why? Look at this. It says the absolute value is equal to negative 10. Think back to 7th grade. When you find the absolute value of something, it's always going to be a positive number because it's the distance away from 0. And distance always has to be positive. So I didn't even have to work this out. I could have remembered that the absolute value is always a positive number. So absolute value equals negative 10 has no solution because there is no absolute value that is a negative. Absolute value must always be positive. All right, so now let's work on the back, and I'm just going to give you, I'll go through the next 2 with you. I have number 7. I have an absolute value of 2x plus 5 being subtracted by 5 equals negative 2. So what we always do is we try to follow those basic rules that we talked about simplifying each side of the equation. So let's look at that first. Can I do anything to this side of the equation? Well, not really. I just really can't. This is a minus 5. I can't really do anything just yet with this absolute value, so there's nothing I can really do. All right. So get the variable to one side of the equation. Well, that's already been done. The variable is on this side of the equation, so there's nothing I can do. Get the use SADMAP to get the variable alone. Well, that's something we can kind of do right now. I cannot do anything with this absolute value. All right, so I have to kind of leave it alone. But what I can do is get rid of this minus 5 using SADMAP. So how do I get rid of a minus 5 here? I do the opposite. I plus 5. And so what that gives me is the absolute value of 2x plus 5 is equal to 3. All right, now that I've done that, I have the absolute value here. I can split this up into 2 equations. I can go 2x plus 5 is equal to a positive 3, and I can do 2x plus 5 is equal to a negative 3. Now I just solve for each one. I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides for this. So I will. That gives me 2x is equal to a negative 2. And I divide by 2 on both sides, and I get 2x is equal to 1. I'm going to check this one over. So I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides. And I get 2x is equal to a negative 8. I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. And I get that x is equal to negative 4. So now my job is to check it. And I'm running out of room here, so I'm actually going to get me a piece of scrap paper. And I'm going to check it on another sheet of paper. All right, here we go. So my answer was 1 first, -1, excuse me. That's going to be the absolute value of 2 times a -1 plus 5 minus 5 equals -2. So we're going to double check this out. 2 times -5 gives me, 2 times -1 is a -2 plus 5 minus 5 equals -2. This right here would give me a 3. Absolute value of 3 minus 5 equals -2. This gives me a positive 3 minus 5 equals -2. And 3 minus 5 is -2. So that does check out. So my answer of -1 is correct. So x is equal to -1. That is correct. And now let's check about x is equal to -4. So the absolute value of 2 times -4 plus 5, all minus 5 is equal to -2. So 2 times a -4 gives me -8 plus 5, and that's the absolute value. We're going to subtract 5. Okay. Well, -8 plus 5 gives me -3, so the absolute value of -3 minus 5 equals -2. Well, the absolute value of -3 is a positive 3 minus 5 equals -2, and that gives me -2 is equal to -2, and that checks out. Cool. So both of those answers check out. Now let's try 8. So 8, we pretty much do the same thing. We check to see if anything can be done on either side. Not really. So what do I do now? We get the variables to one side. Well, they already are on one side. Then we try to get a loan using SADMET. So the best thing for me to do, since I can't do anything with this absolute value expression, is to get rid of this 3. And since this 3 is multiplying the absolute value, I need to get rid of it through division. So I can divide this whole side by 3. And when I do, I get the absolute value of 4x plus 6 is equal to 8. Now my job is to break it up into two equations. 4x plus 6 is equal to 8, and 4x plus 6 is equal to -8. Now I just simply solve. I'm going to subtract 6 on both sides, and I get that 4x is equal to 2. My job now is to divide by 4 on both sides, and I get x is equal to 1/2. Now I do the same thing with the other equation. I subtract 6 on both sides, and I get that 4x is equal to -14. Divide by 4 on both sides, and I get that x is equal to -14/4. Or if we want to simplify this, we can actually say that x is equal to -7 divided by 2. All right, so now that we have that, it's just a matter of checking these out. And for the sake of this video, we're going to go ahead and say that we checked it, and these two answers are correct. All right, so I want you to try 9 and 10 on your own. So for number 9, you should have had x is equal to 7 and x is equal to 1. In algebra, we also write it another way. We don't have to write it out like this. We can actually write x is equal to, and you'll have to forgive me. I've never been able to write this bracket, but I'm going to try to draw it to the best of my ability. Like this is what it looks like. Matter of fact, you can probably see it on your computer. It's to the left of your P, these types of brackets. And so when X has multiple answers, we usually write it like this. And it takes me a long time to write this bracket. So this is kind of the best way to draw it. But as you can see, my handwriting's a little bit sloppy, and I apologize on that. But here's the moral. Another way of having to write these answers, instead of writing it out like this, we could just say x is equal to 1, 7, and it's all in brackets. X is equal to 1 and 7. And it's the same thing for number 10. I have x is equal to a positive 1 and x is equal to a -7. All right, so leaving problem 11 for you. Try that as your challenge problem, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.